Your story, our station.
If you've ever felt trapped in that endless top 40 loop, you know the feeling. Same songs, same sounds, same safe choices. Like the world hit repeat and lost the button to try something new. Today, I want to introduce you to a crew that's built to do the exact opposite. Change the station entirely. Bullet End Flight is based right in the heart of the 505, Albuquerque, where the green chili runs hot and the creative energy somehow runs even hotter. And when I say Bullet End Flight, I'm not talking about one single project or one single vibe. Think of it more like a parent company to a whole family of artistic misfits. People who don't fit neatly into the usual boxes, and honestly, don't want to. At the center of everything is a mission that's pretty simple to say, but not always easy to pull off. Elevate the voices that usually get talked over. The artists who get labeled too niche, or too different, or that weird one, too Albuquerque. Whatever that's supposed to mean. If you've ever heard something like that about your work, this is your invitation to pull up a chair. Because that's not a deal breaker here. That's the whole point. Bullet End Flight is built around inclusivity, creative community building, and giving underrepresented artists the megaphone they deserve. Not as a trend, not as a marketing angle, but as the core identity. It's a response to a creative world that can feel gated, filtered, and overly polished, where the most interesting voices get told to tone it down so they can be easier to sell. And here's where it gets fun. Bullet End Flight doesn't believe in staying in one lane. Because why would you? Why drive a sedan when you could take a spaceship? The whole approach is more like, what does human expression look like across every format? And then going after all of it. Let's start with music, because that's a major part of the DNA. The mindset here isn't pick a genre and stay in it. It's more like, what's the vibe and does it hit? That can mean the spiritual charge of gospel, the late-night pulse of house music, the smooth storytelling and emotion of R&B, or even that classic country charm where life falls apart but somehow the drink is still cold. It's not about fitting into a category. It's about making something that feels alive. But it doesn't stop at music. There's a strong dedication to the spoken word too. Podcasts that get into the real stuff, not just surface-level chatter, and poetry that doesn't play nice. The kind that lands heavy, the kind that says what people avoid saying, the kind that reminds you words can still be dangerous in the best way. Then there's film and TV writing. Getting into scripts that actually have a heartbeat. Not another recycled reboot of a reboot. Not something designed by committee to offend the fewest people possible. The focus is on stories with soul. Stories with perspective. Stories that sound like they came from real lives, in real places, with real edges. And of course, the stage. Because there is nothing like live performance. It's unpredictable, it's electric, and yeah, anything can happen. And usually does. The stage is where art stops being an idea and becomes a moment, right in front of people who can feel it in real time. So why would an artist want to plug into something like this? Because being a starving artist has been romanticized for way too long, and it doesn't need to be the default. And being a lonely artist, trying to build everything by yourself, with no village, no network, no support, That's even worse. Bullet and Flight is about building that village on purpose. The goal is to take the talent that's been brewing in the Southwest, often overlooked, often underestimated, and project it outward. Not in a please notice us kind of way, but in a we're already here, and we're bringing the whole sound with us kind of way. Bullet and Flight positions itself as a launch pad, a safety net, and the hype you didn't realize you were missing. And let's be honest, a lot of people are tired of gatekeepers. Tired of needing permission. Tired of feeling like they have to sand down everything interesting about their work to be taken seriously. If that's you, this is a space that's built for finding your tribe. People who want loud, weird, real art, and who aren't afraid to make it together. If you want to get in the mix, Deombase is https://just-dominic. And if you want the visuals, you can find the YouTube channel at @JustDominicMusic. Bullet and Flight Music, LLC is the company behind it all. And the invitation is open. Check out what's being built, listen to what's coming out, and if you're ready to change the station, this is a good place to start.
Inside Out on Bullet and Flight Radio. Real discussions with mental wellness professionals.
Welcome back to Bullet in Flight Radio, your story, our station. Today I want to sit with something that's ancient, automatic, and honestly dangerously easy to fall into: the us versus them mindset. You've seen it everywhere. In politics, in online spaces, in the way crises get explained in one-line headlines. And it can feel like a fixed law of human nature, like this is simply who we are. But that idea leaves out two big realities. One, we're biologically capable of change. And two, many ancient spiritual traditions say separation is not the deepest truth about us at all. So in this episode, we're going to trace where us versus them comes from, what it does to our minds and communities, and how we can shift into something more accurate and more livable. Not naive, not sentimental, just real, moving from us versus them to us and them. And then we'll get practical, because big ideas only matter if they can survive contact with real life. Let's start with the roots of the reflex. A lot of what we call a social disease is actually an old survival program that's misfiring in a modern world. Psychologists often talk about othering. It's that subtle, sometimes unconscious move where we lock onto differences and use them to break the feeling of connection. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it even hides behind common sense. But the result is the same. The other person stops being a person like you and becomes a category, a threat, a problem. And the brain has hardware for this. When instability rises, when violence spreads, when people are displaced, our nervous systems start hunting for certainty. That's where the amygdala comes in, the brain's threat detector. When it flares up, it wants fast answers. It wants a clear line between safe and unsafe. And one of the quickest ways to feel safe, at least temporarily, is to locate an in-group to cling to and an out-group to fear. It's a shortcut to belonging, but it's also a shortcut to dehumanization. There's another layer too, what we might call the resource trap. Evolutionary psychology suggests tribal thinking spikes when people believe they're fighting over a limited pie. Land, wealth, housing, safety, energy, status. When the story becomes there isn't enough, the mind starts simplifying everything into a brutal binary. For us to survive, they have to lose. And here's the tragedy. That kind of thinking can make complicated, global problems feel manageable. It gives people a villain. It gives people a script. But it also fuels cycles of conflict that create even more scarcity, more fear, and more division. So science can describe the mechanism, but spiritual traditions often go after something deeper. The state of the human spirit, and the illusion that keeps us trapped inside separation. One place this comes through powerfully is in the oldest Bible and the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. The Ethiopian Bible preserves texts that didn't make it into many of its revised and heavily redacted Western canons, including books like Enoch, also called Metzahef Henech, and Jubilees. And whether you approach these texts literally, symbolically, or somewhere in between, what's striking is how they frame division. Across esoteric wisdom traditions, both Eastern and Western, there's a recurring idea that the material world is shaped by an illusion of separation, sometimes described as a veil. In everyday terms, the veil is what makes us look at someone else and decide they are fundamentally alien, fundamentally opposite, fundamentally not connected to us. And if you think about it, that's exactly what us versus them requires. It requires the veil to feel real. Because once you see the other person as fully human, fully complex, carrying their own fears and loves, it becomes much harder to reduce them to an enemy. In the Book of Enoch, there's a specific way this gets described. Tribal division, systemic violence, and the teaching of domination aren't framed as the pure expression of human nature at its best. They're framed as corruptions, distortions introduced through fallen influences, the Watchers, who teach humanity weapons and vanity and separation. Now, again, you can interpret that in different ways, but esoterically, the meaning lands like this. The us versus them pattern is not your true design. It's not the highest version of human life. It's a corruption of alignment, a structural distortion that pushes us into fragmentation. And that leads to one of the most important reversals in these traditions. The real battleground is internal. True spiritual warfare isn't primarily about defeating people out there. It's the daily struggle with the ego's hunger to isolate, to control, to demonize. It's the discipline of catching yourself when you're turning another human being into a symbol of everything you fear. Because the spiritual claim is that the person across from you is not just a separate unit. They're a mirror. They carry the same breath of life, the same divine imprint. And when you treat them like a monster, you don't just harm them. You damage your own capacity to perceive what's real. So how do we move from insight to change? How do we actually pierce the veil? Especially in a world that's hyperconnected, constantly triggering, and filled with incentives to keep us divided. Neuroscientists and clinicians point to something that sounds simple but takes practice. We can rewire the way we categorize people. We can build new mental habits that reduce the automatic pull toward tribal stories. One technique is what we might call active category blurring. The mind loves rigid boxes. Nationality, race, religion, political camp. But those aren't the only boxes that exist. So you intentionally look for overlapping identities. Maybe you and someone else don't share a culture, but you both know what it is to raise a child, or to care for an elder, or to make art, or to grieve, or to survive something that changed you. When you aim your attention at the shared category, the lines soften. You don't erase difference, you just refuse to let difference become a weapon. Another practice is engaging the frontal cortex, basically training yourself to pause instead of react. Fear-based rhetoric, violent imagery, outrage cycles, they're designed to punch straight into the survival brain. And when that happens, you don't think in nuance. You think in threat. So clinicians often recommend something almost embarrassingly basic: stop for a breath. Slow the system down. And ask a sober question. Is this group an immediate, literal threat to my life right now? Or am I being trained to fear them so someone else can gain political power, financial profit, or social control? That question won't solve everything, but it can break the spell. It can interrupt the hijack. A third shift is about who we elevate in our communities. History shows that fractured societies are often healed by what we can call boundary spanners, people who naturally connect worlds, bicultural individuals, immigrants, interfaith organizers, people who can translate across languages, customs, and pain. In toxic tribal cultures, boundary spanners get treated with suspicion. They're told they don't belong anywhere. But in healthy communities, they're recognized as bridges. They're protected and empowered because they help everyone remember that the borders in our minds aren't the whole truth. Now, I want to speak directly to progressive believers for a moment, because if faith is part of your life, it can't just be a private coping tool. It has to become a structural counterweight to tribalism. Comfort is fine, but comfort alone won't hold the line against dehumanization. One practice here is radical hospitality. This is older than modern politics. It's the ancient mandate to treat the stranger, and especially the displaced, not as an inconvenience to tolerate but as a sacred guest. And that word guest matters. A guest is not a project. A guest is not a threat symbol. A guest is a person whose presence changes how you distribute your resources, your attention, your protection. Radical hospitality means your circle expands because the need expands. Not because it's trendy, not because it's easy, but because it's faithful. Another practice is deconstructing internal dogma. That means auditing what you consume and what you repeat. It means looking at your own community spaces, your media diet, your favorite influencers, your group chats, and asking, do any of these rely on scapegoating an outside group in order to strengthen loyalty on the inside? Progressive faith, if it's going to be more than branding, has to reject narratives that build unity through villainizing them. If your belonging requires someone else's dehumanization, it's not spiritual maturity. It's tribal glue. Now let's zoom out to something that's going to shape the next generation whether we like it or not: the energy transition. As finite resources tighten, especially fossil fuels and traditional oil supplies, the us versus them trap becomes a direct route to conflict. Resource fear has historically been one of the fastest accelerants of violence. So what lesson do we pass down? Here's the core shift. When systems shrink, the animal instinct is hoard, build walls, harden the perimeter. But prolonged crisis tends to punish isolationism. Not immediately, but over time. Real security is often built the opposite way. Through hyperlocal mutual aid, shared infrastructure, and cooperative pooling. The next generation needs to learn a sentence that sounds simple but changes everything when you believe it. We don't survive against our neighbors. We survive with them. And despite the headlines, this is not just theory. There's a quieter story happening at the grassroots level, and even within institutions. East and West, indigenous frameworks and Western logistics, are increasingly blending to protect displaced and vulnerable people. You'll see global relief initiatives that combine Western funding and operational precision with philosophies of collective healing like Ubuntu, that deep idea that I am because we are. You'll see mindfulness and trauma-informed approaches used alongside supply chains and emergency housing. Because suffering isn't only a logistical problem. It's also a nervous system problem and a community problem. And you'll see alliances that ignore borders because reality ignores borders. Joint health task forces coordinating across regions. Networks sharing climate-resilient farming techniques across continents. Community organizations that don't wait for state-level permission to care for people, because outbreaks, drought, and displacement don't check passports. When we treat global trauma as a shared human crisis instead of a reason to retreat into separate corners, we strip us versus them of its oxygen. And when top-down systems buckle, what often holds is not a massive bureaucracy. It's what sparks from the ground up. That brings us to mutual aid, and I want to be clear about what mutual aid is because it's often misunderstood. Mutual aid is not charity. Charity can still have a hierarchy: I have, you lack, and I give. Mutual aid starts from a different principle: solidarity. It's neighbors exchanging care because their lives are intertwined. Mutual aid says your stability affects mine. Your safety is connected to my safety. And that's not poetry. That's systems thinking. So let's get practical with a few models and lessons that show what this looks like in real communities. First, decentralized energy autonomy. What we might call the energy oasis model. When centralized grids fail, whether due to severe weather, old infrastructure, or political neglect, it's the most vulnerable who go dark first and stay dark longest. Grassroots energy models flip that script by generating and controlling power locally. A powerful example comes from Ajuntas, Puerto Rico, through the work of Casa Pueblo. After Hurricane Maria devastated the island's electrical grid, this mountain town refused to just wait for a top-down solution that might never arrive in time. With community leadership and environmental organizing, they built a self-sustaining solar microgrid ecosystem. The core infrastructure included hundreds of solar panels spread across central buildings, paired with major battery storage. The point wasn't just to have solar as a symbol. It was to keep the town alive when the larger grid failed. And in a crisis, the way it functions is simple and revolutionary. Key businesses and services stay powered. Think about what that means. A pharmacy can keep medicine cold. A bakery can feed people. Devices can be charged. Emergency services can operate. The town center becomes an actual refuge, an energy oasis, not because someone in a distant office approved funding, but because residents built resilience into the neighborhood itself. Even more interesting, Casa Pueblo has been testing software that can route energy in multiple directions, so power isn't hoarded household by household. Excess energy can be shared dynamically with neighbors who don't have panels. That's a huge philosophical difference. It shifts solar from individual survival to collective coexistence. Second, radical food sovereignty and real-time distribution. Traditional food banks do important work, but they can be slowed down by red tape, eligibility checks, hours of operation, and the sheer bureaucracy of scale. Modern mutual aid food systems often aim for something else: immediate access with dignity. One of the simplest and most effective ideas is the community refrigerator movement, sometimes called Frege. The concept treats food security like a neighborhood utility. It can be as basic as an outdoor, weather-protected fridge and pantry shelf hosted by a business, a community center, or even a household with accessible space. And the rules are human, not humiliating. Take what you need, leave what you can. No forms, no proofs, no interrogation. Just nourishment moving through a community the way it should. What makes it work is crowdsourced logistics. People use hyperlocal group chats or neighborhood social pages to keep the fridge stocked. Someone walks by, sees it's low, snaps a photo, posts it, and within hours others show up with surplus groceries, garden harvests, or prepared meals. It's not perfect, but it's alive. It adapts fast. Then there are rapid response disaster pods. When catastrophic weather hits, grassroots networks in places like New Orleans and Central Florida have repeatedly outpaced federal response times. Not because they have more money, but because they have proximity and trust. These are residents serving their own blocks. They don't need to negotiate layers of bureaucracy to act. Within a day or two of a hurricane making landfall, mutual aid groups can redirect digital funds directly to impacted families, set up neighborhood relief sites, and run communal kitchens using local food that would otherwise spoil during blackouts. They move like living tissue, not like paperwork. So if you're listening and thinking, all right, how do I build something like this where I live? Or what do I pass down to my kids, my students, my younger community members? Let's pull out some core lessons that repeat across successful models. Here's a simple blueprint. First, map your local assets before the crisis. Resilience is rarely invented mid-disaster. It's built in advance by knowing what's already in the neighborhood. Who has a generator? Who has medical training? Who has a truck? Who grows food? Who speaks multiple languages? Who has childcare experience? Who has time during weekdays? Who knows how to fix things? When people don't know their shared assets, they default to panic and dependency. When people do know, they can coordinate fast, and coordination saves lives. Second, build non-transactional trust. Mutual aid collapses if everyone is keeping score. Real communities understand that giving isn't always immediately returned, and that doesn't make it foolish. It makes it functional. You might help someone this week who can't help you back for a year. And you might be the one who needs help next month. A community's true wealth isn't just money. It's the collective capacity to protect its most fragile members without resentment. Third, decentralize your communications. If all your coordination relies on one platform, one internet connection, or one administrator, you've created a single point of failure. Redundancy matters. Signal chats, SMS trees, neighborhood bulletin boards, community radio, in-person check-ins. When systems go sideways, the ability to communicate without a centralized bottleneck is not a luxury. It's infrastructure. And if you zoom out, you can see how all of this is the opposite of us versus them. Mutual aid is us and them. It's the lived rejection of the lie of separation. So let me land this with a question you can carry into your week. When you feel that surge of certainty that turns a group of people into a threat category, what if you treated it as a signal, not a truth? A signal that your amygdala is lit up. A signal that scarcity stories are being offered to you. A signal that the veil is trying to drop over your eyes. And what if, instead, you practiced the pause? You looked for shared identity. You listened to boundary spanners. You chose hospitality over scapegoating. You invested in mutual aid over fear. Because the point isn't to pretend we don't have differences. The point is to stop using difference as permission to abandon our shared humanity. This is Bullet in Flight Radio. Your story, our station. If this episode gave you language for something you've been feeling, take it into your conversations. Share it with someone who wants to build community, not just win arguments. And keep asking the question that dismantles the whole us versus them machine. What would it look like right here where I live to survive with my neighbors instead of against them?
Inside Out on Bullet in Flight Radio. Real discussions with mental wellness professionals.
Your story, our station.